The first time I noticed Derek watching me through his kitchen window, I convinced myself it was coincidence. His eyes would follow my morning jog, track my movements as I watered the front lawn, linger just a moment too long when I waved hello. My neighbor's husband had a way of making the mundane feel heavy, like every glance carried weight I wasn't meant to understand. But Sarah, his wife, always smiled so brightly when she saw me that I buried my discomfort beneath politeness. Until the morning I realized I hadn't seen her in 3 days. The autumn air in suburban Connecticut tasted like secrets that morning, crisp and somehow wrong. Derek stood at the property line, trimming hedges that didn't need trimming, and when I asked about Sarah, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "She's visiting her sister in Boston," he said, but his voice cracked on the word sister, a hairline fracture in his carefully constructed calm. I nodded, smiled, walked away, but something cold had settled in my chest. The way he looked at me then wasn't awkward anymore. It was possessive, hungry, like I was already his. Inside my house, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name. Through the window I could see their colonial-style home, perfect and pristine, with its manicured lawn and cheerful yellow shutters. Sarah had painted those shutters herself last spring, telling me how Derek hated the color, but she'd done it anyway. Now they looked like a lie, bright and false against the gray October sky. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Sarah's number, my thumb hovering over her name. Something told me not to call, not yet, not while Derek might be watching. The neighborhood had always felt safe, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew each other's children by name. But standing there in my living room, watching Derek finally go inside, I realized how little we actually knew about the lives behind those closed doors. How many dinners had Sarah and I shared, laughing over wine about our husbands' quirks, while something terrible festered next door. I thought of all the times Derek had found excuses to talk to me alone, his compliments about my hair, my smile, my laugh. I'd thought he was just friendly, maybe a little socially awkward. Now every memory felt like a warning I'd been too naive to hear. That night I couldn't sleep. And when I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Sarah's face pressed against a window, screaming silently while Derek smiled at me from the darkness. I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of a car door closing, and when I looked outside, Derek's SUV was backing out of his driveway, disappearing into the empty street. Where was he going at this hour? And more importantly, where was Sarah really? The questions wrapped around my throat like hands, and I knew, with a certainty that made my skin crawl, that I was about to discover something I could never unknow. Morning came too slowly, dragging through the dark hours like something wounded. I watched Derek's driveway from my bedroom window, noting when his SUV returned just before dawn, the headlights cutting through the mist like accusations. He sat in the car for 10 minutes before going inside, and even from this distance I could see his hands gripping the steering wheel, his head bowed. What had he been doing all night? The question burned in my mind, refusing to let me look away. When he finally emerged and caught me watching, he waved, and the casual normalcy of the gesture felt obscene. I decided to call Sarah, consequences be damned, but her phone went straight to voicemail, not ringing, just that automated voice telling me the customer was unavailable. My hands shook as I tried again and again, each time meeting the same digital wall. Sarah always answered her phone. She was the kind of person who kept it charged and close, who responded to texts within minutes. The silence on the other end felt like a scream. I left a message, trying to keep my voice steady, asking her to call me back. But I knew, somehow I knew, she never would. The police station smelled like coffee and old paperwork when I walked in that afternoon, my resolve hardening with each step. The officer at the desk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, listened to my concerns with professional patience, but I could see the skepticism forming. 3 days isn't unusual for an adult to be out of contact, she said gently, taking notes anyway. Especially if she's visiting family. Has there been any sign of struggle? Any direct evidence of harm? I had nothing concrete, just instinct and fear, and I watched my credibility crumble with each question I couldn't answer. But she promised to do a wellness check, and I left feeling both relieved and utterly powerless. Derek was waiting on my porch when I got home, and my heart nearly stopped. He held a casserole dish, of all things, Sarah's signature lasagna recipe, and his smile was so warm it made my stomach turn. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, stepping closer, too close, invading the space between us. "Sarah always said you loved her cooking. She wanted me to make sure you were taken care of while she was gone." The way he said her name, past tense almost, made my blood run cold. I took the dish with trembling hands, thanked him automatically, and practically ran inside, throwing the lock the moment the door closed between us. I dumped the lasagna in the trash without even looking at it, my skin crawling with the memory of his proximity. Through the window, I watched him walk back to his house, but instead of going inside, he stood on his lawn, staring at my home. Just staring. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 10, and he didn't move, didn't blink, a statue of obsession carved into my suburban nightmare. When he finally turned away, I saw something in his hand. Was that a phone? Sarah's phone? The thought hit me like a physical blow. If he had her phone, if he'd been the one rejecting my calls, then where was she? And what had he done to make sure she'd never answer again? The wellness check happened the next morning, and I watched from behind my curtains as 2 officers knocked on Derek's door. He answered with perfect composure, invited them in, and 20 minutes later they emerged, shaking his hand, satisfied with whatever story he'd fed them. One officer even laughed at something Derek said, clapping him on the shoulder like they were old friends. My hope shattered into 1,000 cutting pieces. Later, one of the officers came to my door to inform me that Mr. Harrison had been cooperative, that Mrs. Harrison was indeed visiting her sister, and that I shouldn't worry. "He showed us text messages from her," the officer said almost apologetically. "She's fine." But I knew Sarah's texting style, the way she used emojis and always signed off with her initial. Those messages the officer described sounded nothing like her. Derek was smart, calculating, and he'd covered his tracks well enough to fool the police. I was alone in my certainty, isolated by a truth no one else could see. That night I did something I'd never done before. I broke into their house. Well, not broke in exactly. I used the spare key Sarah had given me last year, kept under their garden gnome. My hands shook so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock, but fear and determination pushed me forward. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of your own heartbeat. Everything looked normal. Spotless kitchen, living room perfectly arranged, family photos smiling from the walls. But something felt wrong, sterile, like a stage set rather than a home. I moved through the rooms, searching for anything. Any clue that would prove my suspicions weren't just paranoid delusions. Derek's study was locked, and when I pressed my ear against the door, I could swear I heard something. A faint humming sound, mechanical and steady. I tried the handle again, harder, but it wouldn't budge. What was he hiding behind that door? I found Sarah's phone in the master bedroom, tucked inside her nightstand drawer, fully charged and unlocked. My heart hammered as I scrolled through the recent messages. All to Derek. All about her trip to Boston. All sent after she'd supposedly left. But Sarah had taken her phone with her, Derek said so. Why would it be here? I opened her photo gallery and scrolled back, looking for anything recent. And then I saw it. A video, dated 2 nights ago. My finger hovered over the play button, terror and curiosity warring in my chest. The thumbnail showed Sarah's face, but something about the image looked wrong. Her eyes too wide, her mouth open in what might have been a scream or a plea. Before I could press play, I heard the front door open, and Derek's voice called out, "Honey, I'm home." But Sarah wasn't home, would never be home again, and that greeting was meant for me. I shoved the phone in my pocket, my mind racing through exit strategies. But I was trapped upstairs with only one way down. His footsteps started up the stairs, slow and deliberate, and I could hear him humming that same mechanical sound I'd heard from the study. "I know you're here," he called out, his voice sickeningly gentle. "I've been watching you watch me. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you think Sarah didn't notice either, before I made her stop?" I dove into Sarah's walk-in closet, pressing myself against the back wall, surrounded by her clothes that still smelled like her perfume. Through the slats in the door, I watched Derek enter the bedroom, and the expression on his face was nothing like the friendly neighbor I'd known. His eyes were cold, calculating, scanning the room with predatory precision. "You're just like her," he said softly. talking to the empty room or to me, I couldn't tell. Sarah got curious too. Started asking questions, looking where she shouldn't look. She found my special room and, well... He paused, running his hand along the bedspread. I couldn't let her ruin everything I'd built, everything I'd planned for us. My phone was in my pocket, but my hands were shaking too hard to pull it out silently. Derek moved closer to the closet, and I could see his shadow through the slats, stretching and distorting across the wall. I've loved you for 2 years, he continued, his voice taking on a dreamlike quality. Watched you through the windows, learned your routines, your favorite foods, the way you laugh when you think no one's listening. Sarah was supposed to understand, supposed to accept that she wasn't enough anymore, but she fought back, tried to leave, threatened to tell everyone what a monster I was. He laughed then, a sound that made my blood freeze, as if wanting something beautiful makes you a monster. The closet door flew open before I could react, and Derek stood there, framed by light from the bedroom, looking at me with something that might have been love, if love could be twisted into such a grotesque shape. There you are, he whispered, reaching for me. I screamed and threw myself past him, knocking over a lamp that shattered against the hardwood. I ran for the stairs, but he was faster, grabbing my wrist and spinning me around. His grip was iron, painful, and up close I could see the darkness in his eyes, the absolute absence of humanity. You're going to love my special room, he said. Sarah certainly learned to appreciate it before the end. I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled Sarah's phone from my pocket and hit play on that video, holding it up between us. Sarah's face filled the screen, and her voice, weak and terrified, began to speak. If you're watching this, I'm probably already dead. Derek has me locked in the basement, in a room he built behind the wall. He's been planning this for months, obsessed with our neighbor, with... Derek's face contorted in rage, and he snatched the phone, hurling it against the wall where it exploded into pieces. But it was too late. I'd seen what I needed to see, understood what I needed to understand. The basement. There was a hidden room in the basement, and Sarah might still be alive. Derek's moment of fury gave me the opening I needed. I brought my knee up hard, the way my father had taught me, and when he doubled over, I ran. Down the stairs, through the kitchen, but instead of heading for the front door, I made a split-second decision that would either save Sarah or kill us both. I ran for the basement door, threw it open, and descended into the darkness below. Behind me, Derek roared my name, and I could hear him thundering down the stairs. The basement was unfinished, cold concrete and exposed beams, but I ran my hands along the walls, searching for any seam, any indication of a hidden room. You're only making this harder, Derek shouted from the stairs. I didn't want to hurt you, but if you force my hand... Then my fingers found it, a thin gap in the wall, and I pushed with all my strength. The hidden door swung inward, revealing a small soundproofed room that smelled like fear and decay. Sarah lay on a cot in the corner, alive but barely, her face bruised and her wrist chained to the wall. Our eyes met, and I saw recognition, relief and warning flash across her face. "Run," she whispered, but her voice was destroyed from screaming. "He'll kill us both." But I couldn't leave her. Not after coming this far. Not after finally understanding the horror that had been festering next door. I lunged for the chain, looking for a release, but these were professional restraints, the kind that required a key. Derek had planned this perfectly, I realized with sickening clarity. How long had he been preparing this room, waiting for the right moment? Derek appeared in the doorway, blocking the only exit, and in his hand was a knife that caught the bare bulb's light. "You've ruined everything," he said, and now his voice was empty of pretense, stripped of the charming neighbor facade. "I gave you a chance. I was patient, waiting for you to see what we could have together. But you're just like her, suspicious and ungrateful." He stepped into the room, and Sarah tried to scream, but only managed a broken sob. I grabbed the only thing I could reach, a heavy padlock that lay on the floor, and hurled it at his head. It connected with his temple, and he stumbled, surprised more than hurt. But it gave me seconds, precious seconds. I rushed at him, using my momentum to push him backward through the door. We crashed into the basement's main room, and I could hear Sarah crying out behind us, pleading for me to run. But Derek recovered too quickly. his hand closing around my throat, lifting me until my feet barely touched the ground. "I could have made you so happy," he hissed, his face inches from mine. "I could have given you everything, but you chose to be a problem, just like Sarah." Black spots danced at the edges of my vision, and I clawed at his hands, fighting for breath. This was how I would die, I thought distantly, murdered by a man whose obsession I'd mistaken for awkwardness. Then I remembered. Sarah's phone might be broken, but mine was still in my pocket. With the last of my strength, I managed to pull it free and activate the emergency SOS. The phone began blaring an alarm, and somewhere, somehow, help would be coming. Derek's eyes widened, and his grip loosened just enough for me to suck in a desperate breath. "You stupid bitch," he snarled and threw me aside. I hit the concrete wall hard, pain exploding through my shoulder, but I was alive. Derek stood over me, the knife raised, and I knew he was going to finish this before the police could arrive. Time seemed to slow, and I could see every detail. The vein pulsing in his neck, the sweat on his forehead, the absolute conviction in his eyes that this was somehow justified. The basement door at the top of the stairs burst open, and a voice shouted, "Police! Drop the weapon!" Derek hesitated, the knife still raised, and I saw him calculating his options. Run, fight, or surrender. What would a man who'd kept his wife chained in a basement choose? He looked at me one last time, and the expression on his face was almost sad, as if I'd disappointed him by refusing to die quietly. Then he turned and charged the stairs, knife raised, and the sound of gunshots filled the basement like thunder. Derek's body fell backward, tumbling down the stairs to land at my feet, his eyes still open, still staring at me with that twisted love. It was over. Finally, impossibly, it was over. The ambulance lights painted the neighborhood in alternating red and blue, turning our quiet suburban street into a crime scene. I sat wrapped in a shock blanket while paramedics checked my vitals, watching as they brought Sarah out on a stretcher. She reached for my hand as they passed, squeezed it with what little strength she had left, and whispered, "Thank you," through cracked lips. The detective taking my statement kept asking if I needed a break, but I needed to tell it all, needed to purge every horrifying detail before it could poison me from the inside. Neighbors gathered at the police tape, their faces shocked and disbelieving. Not Derek, not our Derek. He was always so friendly. They found Sarah's sister next, alive but drugged, locked in a storage unit 3 towns over. Derek had taken her first, the detective explained, so he could use her phone to send messages, maintaining the illusion of Sarah's visit. He'd thought of everything, planned for every contingency except one, that someone would care enough to look beyond his perfect facade. The search of his study revealed journals filled with his obsession, photos of me taken through my windows, detailed plans for how he would eliminate Sarah and make me his. Reading those entries later would haunt me, the casual way he wrote about murder, as if my neighbor's death was just an obstacle to overcome. The media descended within hours, turning my trauma into headlines. Suburban nightmare, neighbor uncovers husband's dark obsession. Reporters camped outside my house, shouting questions about Derek, about Sarah, about how it felt to be the object of a killer's fixation. I stopped answering my door, stopped looking at the news, but I couldn't stop seeing Derek's face in my nightmares, couldn't stop wondering if I could have known sooner. Sarah survived physically at least, but she'd been in that room for 11 days, and the woman who eventually came home from the hospital was a shadow of my friend. Some prisons don't need walls. Months passed before I could sleep through the night again, before I could look at the house next door without my chest tightening. Sarah moved away to live with her sister, and I understood completely. How could she stay in a place where every corner held memories of her captivity? I thought about leaving too, selling my house and starting over somewhere Derek's ghost couldn't find me. But that felt too much like letting him win, like allowing his obsession to drive me from my home. So I stayed, but everything was different now. The neighborhood was different, forever marked by the knowledge that evil could hide behind a friendly wave and a casserole dish. Sometimes I think about Derek's last words, about how he believed loving me justified everything. The police psychiatrist called it obsessive love disorder, gave it a clinical name that somehow made it more understandable and more terrifying at once. Because Derek didn't think he was a monster. He thought he was a romantic, willing to do anything for love. That's what keeps me awake some nights, the understanding that to him, Sarah's suffering and my terror were just obstacles between us, problems to be solved. I learned that the most dangerous person isn't always the stranger in the dark alley. Sometimes it's the neighbor who smiles too long, who compliments too much, who watches with eyes that hold promises you never asked for. And now, whenever someone tells me their husband is a little too interested in someone else, I don't laugh it off. I tell them about Derek. I tell them about Sarah. I tell them to trust their instincts. Because sometimes that uncomfortable feeling, that sense that something isn't quite right, is the only warning you get before the monster next door decides it's time to act.